throughout the year. Thank you for being here. We're studying the book of Nehemiah. It's an Old Testament book. As I've mentioned, it's a couple of books before Psalms. Psalms is in the middle of the Bible. Usually if you open to the middle, you'll find Psalms. If you back up a couple of books, you'll find Nehemiah. And we're a couple of weeks in. I can't catch up on every place we've been, but our messages are on our Facebook site. Welcome to Journey on Facebook, and there are videos of the messages if you want to catch up after you've heard the message today with where we have been. Sort of big picture, Nehemiah is serving in Persia. He serves in the king's palace. He's the cupbearer, and he gets news from friends that the situation back in Jerusalem, which is where his ancestors are from, the situation in Jerusalem is dire. The walls are down. There's rubble and debris. The people are in disarray. They are open to attack from enemies. God is being dishonored by the condition of the people. So he has this burden immediately to do something, but he doesn't know what to do. And so when we get to chapter 2, we've seen Nehemiah's emotional response, and then he has this long prayer in chapter 1 that we talked about last week. So we see this spiritual response. But when we get to chapter 2, Nehemiah is moving through the emotional to the spiritual, and now in chapter 2, he's moving to the practical stage. He's moving beyond just feeling something. He's moving beyond even praying about something, and he's asking himself, what needs to be done? What can actually work to make this situation better? So he has an emotional response, a spiritual response, and now a practical response. And I don't mean these necessarily in sequential order as if he had an emotional response and then he finished that, and then he had a spiritual response, and then he finished that, and he had a practical response. All of these were happening at the same time. He felt this burden that led him to begin to pray. He began to call out to God and say, God, what can I do? What do you want me to do about this? And the emotional and the spiritual part of it then led him to respond practically. Right? It led him to respond with a plan, which is what has to happen for all of us when we have a calling from God or when we have a project that we feel like needs to be completed. All solutions eventually have to become practical. All solutions eventually have to become practical. There has to be some steps in the process. There has to be some action plan. I have to do something. Mourning, grieving, even though that's important, and we covered that, mourning and grieving alone doesn't solve problems. And really, as interesting as this sounds in church, just praying about something doesn't always solve the problem. At some point, you have to take what you feel, and you have to take your spiritual convictions, and you have to put them into a practical plan. This is what I'm going to do. We've said, coming off of 2020, many people are rebuilding various areas of their lives. Their spiritual habits, relationships, careers, finances, spiritual habits. There's so much that's getting rebuilt. Marriages, perhaps. Families are having to be rebuilt. At some point, the grief and the prayer has to turn into a plan. It has to get specific. Now, we can't bypass the spiritual and jump to the practical. Sometimes we try to do that. We come up with a plan and then we ask God if He's okay with our plan, or we come up with something we think will work, and then we explain that in terms of our spirituality so that we feel good spiritually about doing the thing we've already decided to do. You can't jump over seeking God and prayer and the spiritual aspect. You can't reverse engineer your spirituality into this solution that you've already come up with. But as you've grieved, as you've had that emotional response, as you've prayed, those are going to lead you to some practical solution. If we're going to solve real problems in the real world, we have to get practical at some point. Nehemiah chapter 2 shows us that Nehemiah was thinking not only emotionally and spiritually, but he's thinking practically as well. This is verse 1, Nehemiah chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill?" This can be nothing but sadness of heart. As we said, Nehemiah is the cupbearer, which not only means he presents the wine, but he makes sure the wine isn't poisoned. He makes sure nobody's trying to kill the king. And so this is one of the most trusted positions for the king. Chapter 2 tells us that this scene that takes place in the palace is in the month of Nisan, which means nothing to us, right? We don't have a month of Nisan. Our calendar is completely different from the calendar of the Old Testament. But what that means is 4 months have passed between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. 4 months. 4 months of Nehemiah grieving. 4 months of Nehemiah praying. As a matter of fact, if you look back up at the end of chapter 1, at the very end of his prayer, Nehemiah says, "Give your servant success today." And you know what he's praying 4 months later? Give your servant success today. Is today? I'd like it today. You ever prayed for today and 4 months go by and today never came? You ever felt like one today lasted 4 months? Right? We all did. We lived through 2020, right? Every day felt like 4 months in 2020. From a spiritual perspective, from an emotional perspective, we know what that's like. God, now. God, why not now? God, today. Okay, now God, today. Nehemiah knows this experience. The problem was, Nehemiah's today and God's today weren't the same today. That was the rub for Nehemiah. What Nehemiah thought of as today and what God intended as today, they weren't the same today. And we have that experience sometimes too, don't we? Like sometimes our today and God's today don't seem to be the same today. And so you know what Nehemiah did? He kept praying. He kept grieving. He kept planning until God revealed when today was. Now, this continuing to pray and continuing to grieve, it eventually started to weigh on him. You probably know what that's like, right? When the answer doesn't come and it doesn't come. And you're okay at first. You're patient at first. You're enduring at first. But the longer it drags out, the more it starts to weigh on you. For Nehemiah, it started to show up in his countenance, in his facial expression. It started to show up in his body language. It started to come out even though he wasn't saying it. You may have seen the meme that goes around that says, "I didn't mean to make that face out loud," right? Some of us. We didn't mean to make that face, but it just kind of came out before we could catch it. For Nehemiah, 4 months of waiting on today was weighing on him. Now this is a problem for Nehemiah because being the cupbearer not only meant you were responsible for bringing the wine and testing the wine, but you were responsible for an atmosphere of celebration. Right? We bring the wine out when it's time to celebrate. That was part of his role, was to make sure everybody's in a good mood, everybody's happy, and for 4 months he had faked it really, really well. He had covered everything up. He had buried his grief. He had put on a happy face. He had gone out before the king until this day when it slipped out. And the king says, "What's going on? It looks like something's wrong deep inside of you." Verse 3, Nehemiah says, "I was very much afraid," because he's not supposed to be sad in front of the king. "I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, 'May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Maybe our tendency, if we had been in Nehemiah's place, maybe our tendency would have been to try to play it off, right? To try to say, my mind was just on something else. I'm back with you now. Let's have a good time. Maybe we would have just tried to sidestep this moment when the king saw sadness. That was not Nehemiah's approach. And he admits, I was afraid. There was risk here. But Nehemiah decided, this is the moment that I'm supposed to step out. This is the moment that I'm supposed to go. Today is finally the today that I've been praying for. I'm going to step into this. Listen, if you're rebuilding something, if there's an area of your life where there's rubble and debris and chaos and you want things to get put back together, pray about it. Pray for as long as you need to pray. Grieve it. Be patient until God says it's today. But at some point you have to go. And at some point you got to take that first step. At some point, you have to step into the moment and say, this is the today I have been praying for. I'm going to move. And that's what Nehemiah does. This is my today. I'm going to put it out there, and I'm going to see what happens. Here's what the king said. The king said to me, what is it you want? Which is a great question. Jesus asked this question over in the Gospels several times. What do you want me to do for you? That's the way Jesus would ask. The king says to Nehemiah, what is it you want? And this is the moment when we realize Nehemiah had not just been grieving the loss, he had not just been praying, Nehemiah had been planning. Right? Nehemiah had been planning while he was praying. Nehemiah had been thinking details while he was grieving. A part of his prayer was, God, how would we do this if we get to do this? What would the steps be? What materials would we need? How long would this take? How many people would it require? As he's grieving and praying, Nehemiah is planning. Nehemiah is thinking. Here's a question. What would you do if God said yes to your prayer? Like if right now, whatever that thing is you've been praying for, whatever that burden you've had, whatever that goal, whatever that plan, whatever that thing is that you want to do, what if God green-lighted that today? Would you know what to do next? See, I think maybe we don't get a yes sometimes because we're not ready for a yes. We don't know what we would do on the other side of yes. We don't know what we would do if God said, sure, go ahead. Maybe God knows that a yes would be wasted on us because we wouldn't know what to do next. What would you do? What would be your first step if God said, yes, I will bless that. I will be in that. I want you to do that. Well, here's what Nehemiah did. Then I prayed to the God of heaven. So one of those sort of really quick, God, don't let me mess this up, right? God, don't let me blow this opportunity. God, give me the right words to say. Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take? And when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. The king said, what do you want to do? And Nehemiah immediately segued into his plan. He didn't say, I don't know, I didn't think you'd let me go. Right? I hadn't thought about it because I never thought I'd be able to do it. No, Nehemiah, in his praying, had put a plan in motion. Just a practical thought, maybe as an analogy, just a practical thought. When someone in authority over you, your supervisor, the person you report to, if they want to give you a yes, if they say, well, tell me what you would do if I put you in that position, or tell me what you would do if I accepted this proposal, and you answer, I don't know, it's just kind of a crazy idea I had. Are they going to say yes? No, they're not going to say yes because you don't know what you want to do. Nehemiah is ready for the yes. He has a plan. Now, it doesn't have to be a perfect plan. It doesn't have to be a complete plan. But you need to know, if you're praying, God, I want to do this. God, I believe I'm called to this. God, this needs to be rebuilt. You and I need at least the beginnings of a plan. As far as we can see, and we can't foresee everything that's going to happen, but as far as we can see, we need a plan. Nehemiah had a plan. I need to go there and help with this. And I'll come back after this amount of time. I think it's going to take me about this long. I'll come back after that. If you keep reading, he segues into other parts of the plan. He says, for example, I'm going to need letters to get through the territories between here and there. Because when I come up to a border of another country, they're not going to let me go through their territory unless you write letters. So Nehemiah ticks off all the letters I need. I need a letter to this king. I need a letter to this king. I need all the letters to get me to Jerusalem and to get me back home. And then he immediately says, you can pull some strings. We're going to need some materials. So if you could send a letter to the guy over the Royal Park and give us this much timber, that's what we're going to need. Nehemiah was ready for a yes. He had thought through the plans. He had thought through the specifics. He was ready when the king said yes. And not only did the king say yes, but if you read that little section right in there, he sends Nehemiah with a military escort. Here's what happens when Nehemiah makes it back to Jerusalem. This is verse 11. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. So here's what's happening. There were parts of the plan that Nehemiah couldn't know until he started moving. Right? As he's talking to the king, he has the first part of his plan ready. I know I'm going to need this. I know it's going to take this much time. I need this material. I need these letters. But there were parts of his plan Nehemiah couldn't know until he got back to Jerusalem. And that's okay. You don't have to know the whole plan. Again, it doesn't have to be a perfect plan. You know enough to start moving. That's where Nehemiah was. I know what it will take to start moving, and then I'll figure it out once I'm moving. You don't have to know the entire plan in order to get started. Some of us are planners and detail people, and we tend to procrastinate because we don't know enough of the plan in our minds. And sometimes you have to start with what you know and let the rest of the plan develop as you go. Now, it's interesting, in Nehemiah 2, that when Nehemiah gets back to Jerusalem, he begins to explore the wall and explore the project at night by himself. As a matter of fact, he said, we just read it, I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. I show up, I kind of hang out for 3 days, make sure nobody's watching me. Then I slip out at night and I start inspecting the wall because I want to get clarity about what this is going to take. Nehemiah doesn't immediately reveal his plan. Nehemiah doesn't immediately say to everybody, come follow me, I'm going to answer all your problems, I'm going to solve all your problems, answer all your questions, I'm going to be the Savior for all of you. He doesn't say that. Nehemiah gets back and slowly, quietly, by himself, maybe with a few trusted people, he begins to explore the plan. Often, when God is developing a plan in us, the right thing to do in the early days is to keep it to ourselves, right? Or keep it amongst a few trusted people as we're working through all the implications of that plan. We have a tendency, some of us, when we have an idea, just immediately to broadcast it to everybody. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to save the world. This is how I'm going to do this. We immediately begin to broadcast it. Social media makes it 100 times worse because so many of us live our lives publicly on social media that we think every time we get a new idea, we need to throw it on social media. But we've thrown so many ideas out that nobody believes that we're really going to follow through on anything now. Nehemiah says, I'm going to take this slowly. I'm going to kind of crock pot this a little bit. I'm going to do some night work. I'm going to marinate in this until I get my plan together, until I know what God is doing. Here's what happens to our plans, our vision, our goal. Sometimes people aren't ready for your vision. They're not ready to receive it yet. But sometimes your vision isn't ready for people. It's so vague, it's so generalized, it's lacking plans and structure that nobody can grab onto that plan. Nobody can say, yeah, I want to support that. Yes, I want to be a part of that. We need to invest the prayer time, the seeking time, the planning time, the night work that Nehemiah was doing, so that when we present our vision, people go, yeah, I see that. I want to be a part of that. This is exactly what Nehemiah does. This is verse 17. He's done all the planning. He's done the night work. He slowly let things develop. In verse 17, then I said to them, the people of Jerusalem, then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. Let's just take that last sentence. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. This is one of the benefits of moving slowly with our vision and our rebuilding. This is one of the benefits of crockpot, of night work, of taking a systematic, slow approach, not revealing it too soon. And that is, by the time we reveal it, we can say, look, I know this is new to you. I know this is the first time you're hearing it. But I want to tell you how God's been working the last couple of months to get me to this point. I know you're just hearing the plan. But when I was back in Persia, God opened the door for me to talk to the king. The king gave me all the letters I need. All of that timber you've been wondering where it came from, God used the king to do that. As we walk slowly through visions and plans, we're able to point to how God has already been at work when we reveal what God wants to do in the future. Next thing, and this is where we'll land today. Often, being the leader means saying what everyone already knows and then doing something about it. Often, being the leader is this simple. It's saying what everybody already knows, pointing out what everybody already sees, and saying, let's do something about this. Nehemiah stands up and says, you see the trouble we're in. This isn't news to any of you. The walls have been down for 150 years. You all have been living with the walls down your entire life. You see the trouble we're in. This is not a news flash. Sometimes being the leader is as simple as having the boldness to say, we all see it. We've all been ignoring it. It's time to fix it. We all see it. We've all stepped around the rubble. It's time to fix it. Max Dupree writes leadership books. Dupree says that the first job of a leader is to define reality. To say, this is what is. Not this is what we want it to be, this is what we hope it's going to be, this is what we wish it could be. The first job of the leader is to say, this is what is. We all see it. The elephant in the room, right? We use that phrase. The elephant in the room, we all know it, but nobody's talking about it. We keep having staff meetings. We all know in the back of our mind what's going on. Nobody verbalizes. We keep sending the same email around. And we all roll our eyes every time we get the email, but nobody will say anything, right? Job number one of the leader. The simplest job of the leader is to say, look, we all see it. This isn't new information. We all know it's broken. Who's going to do something about it? Who's going to step up and say, I want to be a part of fixing it? Being the leader in your family may be as simple as someone saying, we all know this isn't working. Why don't we fix it? Being the leader in your marriage may be as simple as one spouse or the other saying, we keep ignoring this. Why don't we put some effort into fixing it? Being a leader in your office may be having the courage to stand up and say, we all know it. We all roll our eyes every time it gets said. We've discussed it 100 times and then we go back to our offices. We don't do anything about it. Why don't we just fix it once and for all? Being a leader in your peer group, students, may be as simple as saying, we all know we're going to get in trouble for this. Why don't we just not do it? Right? If you ask your parents and your aunts and uncles about the time they got in trouble the most, they will probably tell you, we all know this was going to end badly, but nobody would say it and we just all went and did it. And I mean, sometimes being the leader is saying, we all know. Why don't we do something different? Every time we hear stories about the need for foster care in our state, we all agree that there's a problem. We all go, that's a problem. If we put the numbers up today, we would all go, that's a problem. But there are certain families, some in our church, many in our state and our nation, there are some families who say, you know what, we all see it. We're going to do something about it. Even if it's just for one, we're going to do something about it. When you hear the stories of 18-year-olds who age out of foster care with no significant adult relationships in their life, they've gone all the way through the foster care system and have never made a connection with another adult, and at 18, the system says, you're on your own now. When we hear those stories, we all say, that's a problem. We see it. Nobody has to explain it to us. We know that's a problem. Pam Parrish, Connection Homes, decided one day, we all see it. This organization is going to do something about it. If you've ever seen a homeless person in Loganville or Monroe, if you're aware of any person struggling with addiction in our area, you know that's a problem. When you drive past them, you know that's a problem. Somebody should do something. Michael Giddens, Four Winds Ministry, decided, we all see it. We're going to do something about it. Food insecurity, poverty. Megan Herndon, Shepherd staff, decided, we all see it. I mean, we all agree this is a problem. People need to be helped. We all see it. I'm going to do something about it. Those organizations that we gave $30,000 to, they're made up of people who see the same things you and I see. Same things. They just decided, we're going to do something about it. Whatever needs to be rebuilt, wherever the struggles, wherever the pain is, you know what it takes? It takes somebody saying, we all see it. I'm going to do something. To be the person who doesn't step around the rubble, but steps into the rubble. And grabs a hammer, who stacks up some rocks. Somebody who gets calluses on their hands. Not at something new, not at something that nobody's ever thought of, but at something that most people see and don't do anything about. In 2021, what is that thing for you? What is that thing for you? I'll say this all throughout the series. You can't do everything. You can't build the whole wall. You can't build 10 walls. But what is that thing for you that everybody else sees, but God is tapping you on the heart to say, I want you to not just see it, I want you to do something. Where you won't just step around the rubble, you'll step into the rubble and say, God, use me. Use me. Let's pray. God, help us to be people who don't just see it, who don't just acknowledge it, who don't just pray about it or grieve it. Help us to be people who do something about it. God, we live in a broken world with debris and rubble and dust everywhere. We can't fix it all. No individual can fix it all. But we shouldn't just keep stepping over all of it either. Burden our hearts this year. Grieve our hearts for a section of the wall that we're supposed to rebuild. God, help us as a church to see with your eyes, to not be able to ignore what's really happening, but to be hands that heal, feet that rush to hurting people. Help us to be builders. Give us the plan. And where we don't have all of the plan, help us to move forward in faith and raise up among this church leaders. Leaders who will simply say, we all see it, come help me do something about it. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.